Happy Easter, everyone, and welcome to the weekly show with Jimmy and Joe, where we're coming to you live every week. We never know whether it's Saturday or Sunday, but we are guaranteeing we're coming live to you every weekend. So, looking forward to the show today, Joe. I know it's a holiday weekend, and so I'm not sure what the audience will be like today. Don't necessarily blame them. Hopefully, people are with family, enjoying the long weekend. Maybe it's even spring break for some folks, but regardless, we still want to continue to have this weekly conversation. We want to talk about leadership. Talk about leadership always because we know it's always about leadership. So, Joe, good to see you. Where are you coming from today, buddy? Looks like you're in the Blues Clues room today. What's going on there? Is that a crib behind you, or what's going on there?
I have. We are in northern Wisconsin right now at my in-laws' place. Beautiful, beautiful. Phillips, Wisconsin is gorgeous, and I love it up here. And I am in the upper room, just kind of away from people, and it's a nice spot to be. It's cold. It's like it's 21 degrees in Wisconsin right now. 21.
Oh, that's not fun. Joe, you know what I'm laughing at? I'm going to see how soft you can speak today because I bet your family's like, what's going on up there? Why is Joe screaming? What was Joe screaming at up there? I can see it already.
Hey, they're still a kid. They're still kids. The older, they're still sleeping, and this time for them to wake up. But they get they should get up. So maybe I'll be a little loud just to make sure that they get up.
That's right. Well, listen, we got a couple people jumping in, so that's great. So if you are joining us live this morning, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat box just who you are, what your title is, where you're coming at us to us from this morning, we would love to connect with you. As always, audience, if you do have a problem of practice or something that's on your mind or a question that you have, throw it in the chat, and we will do our very best to answer it. Now, understand this is free, so take what you get. This is the best we've got. So, but we would love to hear from you. If you also want to jump into the studio with us, of course, we always welcome that as well. If you're saying, I'm not sure I want to be on camera, that's okay. We can do voice only as well. So whatever works for you. But having said that, Joe, I was thinking this morning after spending the week out in classrooms this past week, it reminded me of something. And it reminded me how, as a principal, that was an area that I just really struggle with in confidence. And be honest with you, part of that reason is because for the audience that doesn't know this, as far as the classroom goes, I was only a classroom teacher for 4 years, Joe. And so because of that, I often feel as a young administrator going into the profession, I always felt a little hypocritical trying to go in and talk to people about instruction and, assessments, curriculum, all those types of things, even lesson planning, those types of things. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't have that, but it certainly wasn't to the level. And as I continued to gain experience in the area of administration, the longer I was out of the classroom, the harder it was, right? And so in our work that we do today, it's one thing I noticed still is that very few principals feel confident when they're going into classrooms. And so I wanted to spend some time kind of talking about that today, because the good news is, even though I've been out of the profession for 5 years, here's the crazy part. I feel like I'm stronger than ever now as an instructional leader. It's because I spend so much time in classrooms, which is interesting, right? Which is a reminder why we need to be in classrooms, why we need to be sitting in collaborative meetings, grade level meetings, PLCs, is to continue to be really intentional, learn as much as we want, ask people, share with people, be a little vulnerable, but really learn from others. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what are some ways that we can support our current building principals that are out there. What ideas do you have when it comes to what are some of the things you're doing currently as an administrator as far as helping lead the learning in your organization? So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. Again, the conversation can go anywhere you want it to go. Doesn't mean you can't throw something else in the chat box. We can switch gears very quickly and then jump back in. But Joe, in your district, obviously as the superintendent, right? That's another layer that adds another challenge. But I also know you like to get into classrooms. And so just want to hear some general thoughts on that. And then let's get into some specifics. And let's share some ways and specific ways that principals can lead the learning. So if you have some suggestions, throw those in the chat box. If you want to join us in the studios, what are some of the things you do? We would love to have you here and listen to you and hear from you and the things you're doing. So anyway, Joe Sanfilippo, thoughts on leading the learning, my friend?
I'll tell you, I think the farther that you get away from the classroom, the harder it is to, make suggestions for that area. But you also start to feel a little bit almost not inadequate, but you feel a little bit worse that you're not there all the time to help out. And that's how I felt about it. And as I still feel about it, the farther I get away from it, the harder it is to, feel like I can have a huge impact on the daily conversations about what we're doing. So I think it's a big piece of it, is to really think about how are you making sure that you structure your opportunity so you can be in that spot where you can help out.
Yeah, and Joe, what I did this morning, actually, before we got on the air, what I did honestly is I just went through and just started writing different ways that administrators could lead the learning.
Right.
And so I'd like to just share two at a time, and then I'll share a couple thoughts on it, and then have you share a thought, and if you want to jump in other ones, but maybe see if this kind of gets you to think about some different ways. And are you doing some of the things, whether it's the audience or you, Joe? And then what are some thoughts on this? So I'm going to start off with a real simple one. One of the ways just leading the learning is, and we've already mentioned it, how visible are we being intentional in getting into classrooms? Let's just start there. Number one, I think we got to get into classrooms. So I know administrators struggle for that. They start off really well. They struggle as the year goes on. There are busy times during the year. And the next thing you know, oh my God, I haven't been in a classroom really for 3 or 4 weeks. And we start feeling guilty about that. So how can we be really intentional? We talked last week, Joe, if you remember, about using our administrative assistants to help us schedule and help us with our schedules, to be really intentional and blocking off time to get into classrooms. But let's talk about the purpose of those visits. And one of the things I thought was, well, what if, first of all, we're just really clear with staff about, hey, one of my goals is to be in classrooms on a regular basis. But when I come in, honestly, in the first 9 weeks, what I really just want to focus on is I just want to focus on just walking in and just seeing all the things that are happening. I'm not there to be critical. I'm not even there to give feedback. I'm just there to observe and learn about your leadership style, your teaching style, some of the things you're happening in your classroom, but also to get a snapshot of the entire building. What's going on in the classrooms that isn't aligned with our building goals. And so just first of all, maybe just relationship building, just getting the classrooms, checking on staff, doing just kind of barometer checks, how they're doing, seeing some instruction, talking to kids, building relationships. So I would just say building relationships. And then also maybe the second one is what I would call maybe learning questions. And learning questions would mean something along the line like, I'm going in not to necessarily even observe the teacher, but to ask kids questions, to see what they're working on, ask them questions. Hey, what are you working on? What are you learning? Why is that? What have you been doing? Those types of things. And just start there, just being very engaged with students when we go into classrooms and be very visible. So we'll start there with a couple simple ones. I got a whole list, Joe. I've got like 15 to 20 things that we can do to lead the learning in our schools. And I'll just kind of keep running those down and see what people are doing. And people might say, hey, I'm doing that already. Hey, I never thought of that. I was doing that. Why did I quit doing that? Maybe I need to be more intentional in going back, especially as we close the year out right now. And again, I know there are a lot of things going on, but maybe there's a good place to start right now.
I think you're right. Is my sound any better for you, Jimmy?
Yeah, it's a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I think I was just getting some echo. So I think the first thing that you talk about is really just having the conversation with what that looks like in the context of what the day is, right? So if we're putting it into, if we're intentional about making it a priority to put in our day, then we want to make sure that that's part of the conversation leading up to it. And I think, from a principal standpoint, I know that our group is in on a very regular basis, and I'm sure that they're visible at the same time, getting into the classrooms to just make sure that they're available to teachers. And I think that's a big deal in terms of that part of it, is actually scheduling that into the space. But it just sometimes it gets overwhelming, and it's interesting how it gets pushed off to the side for the other things that have to get done. And so when we make it a priority by intentionally putting it into our daily routine, we're going to find a much better connection with our staff from an instructional standpoint. And I know that's one of the things that I honestly feel guilty about from the superintendent lens is the farther that I get away from it, just being, I can be in the classrooms, I can be in hallways, with our, with all of our teachers and staff members. But there are a lot of times that I feel like I'm not there for the instruction piece of it. I'm more there to just be a support in terms of what they need in that moment. And it's a great reminder to me and to all superintendents too, that the farther that you get away from it, the harder it is to really connect in that moment with the people that are, that are like in the middle of that work.
Yeah. Michelle in the chat box writes in there, we have a schedule so that one of us is in the room each week. So again, it's not necessarily, we know they're building principals that are kind of flying solo, but we also know they're building principals that have assistant principals and other administrators. So maybe work as a team, right, to team that up. Talk a little bit about sending emails, either beginning, validating some of the feedback, maybe something they saw. I do know of a couple of administrators that even today still use Voxer to give feedback. So there's ways to do that through email, leave a personal note. Some people use Voxer to leave a feedback if teachers are on Voxer and so forth, but just to share something positive they've seen. So, Joe, one of the things is that we worked on this week when I was out in some buildings is working with administrators just to have unified expectations about, well, what's my purpose when I'm going into classrooms? So let's say maybe we're already 4 months into the year and we've kind of focused initially on just building relationships, being visible, connecting with kids, asking learning questions. But eventually that transitions into a little bit about what are our unified expectations when administrators are going into classrooms and how do they align with our building goals? And I do think it's important that everybody be on the same page so we don't have teachers saying, well, what are they looking for? What are they doing in here? So the more visible we can be, the more active we can be, then I think the less threatening it is because there's clarity about why we're in the classroom. So 3 areas that I often share that I think are really effective, to be honest with you, and I'm sure there's a bazillion things to look for. But number one is, one of the things I always look for is how are teachers being intentional in building community in the classroom, those connections, that relationship building. How are we being intentional in building community within the relationships of the students, right? Are there opportunities for students to engage and interact in ways that are not just necessarily academic, but more on the social emotional learning side in terms of telling stories, getting to understand one another, know one another, activities, having fun, challenging not just the learning component, but definitely in the area of relationships or connections, right? Or building community. Number 2, the idea of engagement. We hear this all the time. Obviously, we want students engaged in the learning. And so what does that look like? And how have we defined that as a staff? And how do we ensure that all classrooms are being intentional and coming up with some sort of framework that all staff is going to use in terms of engagement activities, but yet give teachers the autonomy to do the things that they feel confident about or have had success with, or feel just from their own experiences that they want to try these different things in terms of being risk takers and being innovative and creative and so forth. And then the last one is the formative assessments. I still think that we have to be really intentional in how do we know what kids know or what are they learning, right? If you think about the 4 essential questions of the PLCs and so forth, but one of those is formative assessments, right? The idea of how do I really know what kids are learning and how do I know what they know? And how are we being intentional and taking time, again, as a staff, what are some formative assessments that we've all agreed that we're going to utilize, but yet I also want the autonomy to utilize other ones, because when it comes to measuring these things, I think that's always a challenge for people, like specifically what's the data we're going to collect. So again, I do think those 3 areas, building community or connections or relationships, is one area to look for when you go into classrooms. How are students, what's the engagement look like in the classroom? What's the interaction between the kids? How are kids working together to learn? What's the inquiry-based model look like? Or is it still teacher-directed, teacher-directed, teacher-directed? Or are students having an opportunity to have dialogue and discussion and ask questions and all these things when we know what we talk about good instruction? And then finally, how are we checking for understanding that isn't always the choral check for understanding? How are we giving kids pair share, opportunities to talk, ask questions? What are we doing intentionally to check that understanding individually as well as group wise? And so anyway, so those are some things that I think about as the leaders, we walk into classrooms. If we can just focus on those 3 things, I think we're going to get some pretty good results in terms of conversation and feedback and what that looks like when we walk into classrooms.
Yeah, well, I think it starts with common understanding of what you're looking for and what the intent of being in that space is for you and for them. And if it's the thing about that conversation is it a conversation or is it a directive, right? Because if it's a conversation in terms of what I'm looking for and what you want me to look for, now we can really kind of get ourselves to a spot where we're all working in the same direction. If it's this is what I need to happen, then all of a sudden you put up a wall in terms of, well, we're not really valuing what's going on in that space because we've told them this is exactly what needs to happen, right? If you give them some latitude in terms of how that standard is met or how the instruction is delivered, then you're going to have a much better conversation about what that looks like. And I think the other thing is, what are you doing prior to entering the classroom? Have you had multiple conversations about what that space looks like and, what you can do to help out? And is there anything specific you want me to be looking for? And is there any materials or anything? Are there things going on in the classroom that you want me to take a look at and see how you're helping, or how you're addressing those? Whatever that is, give them an active voice in terms of what you're looking for and why you're there. And that really helps the process.
Yeah, the active voice is critical, Joe, and you make a great point there. So if you're just joining us this morning, we're talking about leading the learning in our schools. How are we modeling that as leaders in our schools? How are we building a community of leaders? How are we getting other people into classrooms? Remember, teachers learn best from teachers, but they can also learn from us administrators, and we certainly can learn a lot from our teachers. So let's keep going. If you're just joining us, if you want to jump into the studio to talk a little bit about what are some of the things you're doing in the building to lead the learning. Thank you, Ashley, for that comment. She's absolutely right in terms of feedback. And if it's only information, it needs to be tied to a goal. So it's a good reminder again, what are we measuring? How do we know it's actually making a difference? But as Joe said, we have to give teachers a voice in that. It can't just be us coming in and saying, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that. What have we agreed to that we're going to be looking for? And what have we talked about how we're going to measure it? Let's work together. Let's be in partnership and let's model that community. Let's support our teachers because we know teachers are doing the very best they can and they want to be effective. They want to be great. But guess what, teachers? So do your principals. So how do we work together to support one another in that learning? This week, I had the chance to also watch some PLC work in action. And that's an interesting one, right? Because wherever I go, I do get concerned that sometimes this PLC, and again, by the way, I am a believer in PLCs because I'm a Rick DeFore fan, always have been a Rick DeFore fan. But I also feel that word is just a little overused, right? As soon as we get into a group, we want to call it PLCs. And I've always said, most people will claim to be a PLC district, but I think the real question is, are we an effective PLC district, right? And how are we ensuring and supporting that all PLCs are effective? So building principals, I'm going to ask you to reflect on this just for a second. When you walk around the building and you attend PLCs or go to certain PLCs, in your mind, do you have what you would consider model PLC teams, right? So I want you to think about that for a second. And if you do, the question then is, how are we being intentional to support the other PLCs and growing and developing them so they too can be model PLCs? So that's the one thing I'd question you on, current building leaders. How are we being intentional and really building this community? If we have one effective, how are we using that effective PLC to continue to grow and develop the other PLCs? And how do we do that? Second of all, building administrators, are you a part of a PLC, right? If we're asking teachers to do that, what does our PLC look like? What data are we collecting? What students are we talking about? What staff, what data are we looking at? And so just some things to reflect on. Again, not trying to overwhelm administrators because I know many say, well, Jimmy, where am I going to find the time to do that? I know, but we're asking teachers to find the time to do that. And we're going to come across a little hypocritical if we're not willing to do the same thing. Right. So when we're going and attending PLCs, right, what's our role in that? Going back again, have we been clear? Yes, we want to be observers, but it doesn't mean we can't offer something, but we also don't want to dominate the conversation. Part of building a community of leaders and building capacity is to allow others to lead those meetings. And we serve more as a facilitator, let's say, or we interject every now and then, or we pose certain questions. But how are we also continue to support our PLC or our collaborative team leaders or our grade level team leaders? How are we continue to offer them growth and support and learning opportunities? In other words, what training are we giving these individuals? Remember, oftentimes there's a lot of turnover in buildings. People haven't been trained for years. And I'm a big believer is that we have to help people be great. So we have to really be supportive and being intentional. So what's the role administrators we're playing? What questions are we asking? And more importantly, when those PLCs are over and we've observed them, how are we being intentional to circle back, to ask questions, to learn, to be a little bit more curious about how we're doing things and to kind of push the thinking of others? In other words, go back to that framework, go back to that structure. What are we trying to get out of these PLCs? And are they turning just kind of into meetings again? Are they just meetings? And we're talking about things that we shouldn't be talking about, like, oh, all of a sudden we're talking about field trips and forms and how we're going to line up. And I'm like, what does this have to do with a PLC, right? It doesn't mean those things aren't important, but we don't want to overlap that and confuse that. So that's what I want to hear from principals out there. Are you in PLCs? What does that look like for you? What are the types of things you're doing that could help other administrators when they're doing their visits and attending those PLC teams.
And how are we making sure that we structure what we do so everybody has an understanding about what that's supposed to look like wherever and whenever we connect? I mean, that's a big deal in terms of that clarity of what the connection is about and what's going to be done beyond the connection. So if we can keep continuing to make sure that there's a structure of what we do, there's a better chance for people to walk away and feel like the connection was worth it, rather than going out and having the second staff meeting, which we know happens, right? When you leave the staff meeting, then the second staff meeting happens in the lounge or the classroom or the parking lot or whatever, because there wasn't clarity to why we connected to begin with. So how are we making sure that that's part of the conversation, so we don't understand that we're utilizing people's time the way that we want to utilize people's time? Because you just mentioned it, Jimmy. Like when people say, "Well, I don't have time for that," I understand that, and we kind of have to think about how are we making sure that that things are a priority to get together and connect, but at the same time, are we making sure that every time that we come to connect, whether it's a meeting, a PLC, whatever it is, right? Is there an outcome that we can all walk away with going, this was a valuable use of our time? And as an administrator, we've talked about this before. If you think about, is it worth the meeting time? Have you talked about, not only is it time, is it worth it to bring everybody together from an idea standpoint and from a connection standpoint, but there's a financial component too. If you've ever broken down everybody's salary by hour and then think about how much it costs you to put all those people in that room for a 45-minute meeting, was the meeting worth $1,200? Was it worth $2,500 in terms of salary? I mean, think about it that way. Is it really worth it in terms of what you're doing or how you're connecting? Because that's just a different way to look at it. And if you just meet just to meet, that second meeting is going to be longer, and it's not going to help the original meeting to begin with anyway, right? So how can we make sure that it's clear, that we're focused on what we want to do to get done moving forward, and that we're not just meeting to meet, because that's when the secondary connections happen, and it really impacts the next meeting that we're having as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, for sharing that. Absolutely. Ashley, thank you so much. And Don, thank you for your comments. Ashley, yes, great reminder. What happens when we have new curriculum in the building, right? Yeah. Again, it's a lot of work when we're having new initiatives and so forth. And the second part she talks about is the importance of focusing on the what, right? What do we want our students to know? And that's an important piece. We can't ever forget, at the end of the day, it's about the students, right? And what they're learning. And so we don't want to lose focus of that. And so I want to give a special shout out to my man, Jack, this morning, who's watching. Jack, my buddy, my 10-year-old buddy out there. Thank you for being a part of the show today. You are the man, buddy. Love you. Hey, having said that, let's talk a little bit about some simple ways, Joe. So just things like covering classes, right? We know in the era of COVID, I think principals are covering classes more than they've ever covered classes. And so again, a reminder to that. We hope that eventually, when things get back to the quasi, what we call normalcy, right? Who knows what that means? But the bottom line is that we don't forget the importance and the value that brought, right? And not just doing it for emergency purposes, but being intentional and covering classes so we can remember what it's like to support our teachers, but not just covering the classes, but maybe also doing some partner planning, maybe sitting down together, being intentional about that, whether you're a department, whether grade levels, but actually going in and sitting down and planning a lesson with a teacher for us to remind ourselves, man, what are the challenges? Sometimes it is difficult to kind of plan this or to come up with something creative or come up with a hook or keep kids engaged. And, there is no class that we know of that's going to have kids engaged 100% of the time. That's not even real, people. And we know that. But what are some things that we can do to support our teachers in some of that? Whether it's partner planning, getting to classrooms, maybe it's co-teaching, not only just planning the lesson, but also doing a co-teach. It doesn't mean we have to be the 45 minutes or an hour if we're in a block, but even just a part of a lesson, right? Maybe it's 20 minutes of a lesson that we can be a part of to co-teach. All building principals, for the most part, at some point did teach, whether it's in your content area or outside your content area. How can we play a role in that? Even if it's just getting into classrooms and doing read alouds, just doing read alouds, right? Anything to get into classroom, to get in front of kids and let kids see you in a different light also, and remind kids, because I think sometimes kids forget, like, oh, you were a teacher? Yes, I was a teacher before I was an administrator. So those are some other ways that we can be really intentional. So again, we're talking about leading the learning in our building today. Ashley or Don or anybody, if you want to jump in the studio, please join us. We'll put the link in here, or anyone else that talk about what are some things you're doing, even if it's just one thing, one idea that you do that you'd want to share with the audience. We'd love to hear from you. So Joe, any other thoughts on any of those? Read alouds, partner planning, co-teaching, covering classes. Any thoughts on any of those, my friend?
Well, I think there's two things that I think I want to get. I'm just kind of clarify in terms of what we do. And so if when it comes down to just getting into a classroom and everything that goes along with it is really cool. That the most effective use of time that I've seen with a number of administrators is actually, talking about getting into classrooms and areas in which they have a general interest or they have history or whatever the case may be. If they ever, I've been asked to come in and talk about, public speaking, or I've been asked to come in and talk about social media with kids or whatever, or video creation or whatever. And if you can put some of the stuff that you love to do in those spaces, it gives you a better connection to not only kids, but the teacher in that spot. And maybe provide a resource, but you can do that. You can co-teach that or connect people with people, and what that looks like. I think that's a really important piece of what we do, is to try to figure out what are we good at, and how can we make sure that we help people with the work that they're doing, not only to be part of it, but also to it really kind of brings your own love to the classroom as well. I think that's a big deal, right? Don Epps.
Hey.
Hi,
guys.
Don Epps in the house.
I got the sauna suit on today. I do not advise this, okay?
Don, I was just wondering, are you wearing a sauna suit or were you out hunting? I thought, is he wearing,
what are you doing?
All right, I got the elliptical machine going heavy in the hills, and I see my two favorite guys on the YouTube, so I thought I got to jump in with them real quick. Oh my gosh, this is like such an honor.
I love it.
I thought I'd at least be wearing a tuxedo T-shirt the first time I get to spend time with you guys.
Hey, man, I got my Walmart. Look at it. Check me out. Like Walmart, right where we at. Walmart. I'm repping the local gas station in town.
Yeah.
Oh
my gosh.
You want some pizza? You're driving through Fall Creek. You want some ready-made pizza? They're fantastic. They make their own pizza. It's fantastic, right?
Fall Creek.
I'm trying to get to that level, Tim, Jimmy. So we're all trying to rep around here. That's what we're trying to do. I can tell you're working out, Don. Now you're making me feel bad.
No, I don't want any excuse anymore for someone to say, "Oh, I don't want to come on camera because I'm not ready." Look at Don.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I ain't got my horrible headband here, okay? So I took it off. So
Don, I thought that was a stock. I swear to God, that was a stock. I was
this is like a
Don, what are you doing?
1985 headband, and so it brings me good luck, and so I still wear it.
Yes, it does.
So trust me, I'm not presentable for live air right now. I'm not presentable.
Yes, you are. Hey, Don,
thanks for jumping on. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, for those who don't know you, tell us what your role is, where you're coming from this morning, and we're talking about leading the learning. So share a couple nuggets with us this morning, Don.
Yep. I'm the principal of the Rocket Nation at Royster Middle School in Chanute, Kansas, and I look up to you guys so much, and I really appreciate everything you're doing for education. And like going to Fall Creek's like going to the Mecca land if I can ever get there one day. But anyway. But no, we're excited. We're always chasing greatness, trying to be the best we can be for the kids, and that just means it's being your best you, And so just an honor.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes down to leading learning in your area, Don, what do you think is really important that leaders make sure that they're doing to lead their buildings in the learning process that happens in classrooms?
Well, I think it's about micro visits. You can't make it standalone events.
Yeah.
You being a part of the classroom has to be a part of everyday culture in that building. And you go in, if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, you always want to shoot for 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, two things have got to happen for me. Number one, you have to have a meaningful connection to that classroom where the kids, they feel that you are not dominating that classroom as an administrator, but you support the classroom. There's a big difference. And then the second thing is giving that teacher viable feedback on that visit. And that's the one thing that we always do is that we ignore those micro visits in the classroom. Two look fors I always have that are really impactful. Number one, what are the students' role in the learning process? So what's their role? I think sometimes that's easily ignored. Are they a observer, or are they a problem solver? Are they a generator of knowledge, an innovator? And so that's one thing I always look for. Another one is, how do we know the students are learning? Like you guys mentioned earlier, how do we know the students are learning? And just like in coaching or anything else, we got to do those immediate on-the-spot formative assessments to guide our instruction. And a good teacher they're like a 16 speed. Okay, they can hit the gear they need. You know, a first year teacher a lot of times has one gear, and if that gear doesn't work, then a lot of times their instruction will really suffer. And that's where we're getting across the hallways and mentoring and working with our young staff and giving them those extra gears, because those extra gears only come with experience. You know, you trial and error.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point, Don, when it comes to the first question that you asked. I think is so important in terms of, you know, what's their role, what's the student role in the learning process, right? Are they observer?
Yep.
Are they a problem solver? Are they a critical thinker? What are we doing to make sure that that's happening? And it does get overlooked sometimes, because we're going in to look at the teacher and see what they're doing. What's the student component of what that looks like? And that can be great feedback too. That's a great way to start.
Yeah.
Hey, John, let me ask you a question. When you look at your current staff right now and you in your building, and I want you to think about a handful of your most effective teachers, what's one thing you notice that they do that they always seem to get really great results? What is it they're doing in the classroom based on some of the things you just shared? What is it you're seeing from those classrooms?
Well, the first thing we always start with, they build a community in that classroom where the kids feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves. And that's the biggest thing impacts our school as a whole, is that we have teachers who really value relationships. And I know it's relationships, like you said earlier, Jimmy, about PLC, everybody uses the word relationship, but does that student feel valued? And that's the biggest area. We close more learning gaps through relationship building and building community within the classroom than anything else. And then it goes back to your best practices, you know, going back to just, we have to go back to mastering our best practices, but we have to be able to be innovative to look at next practice. And like I said, we overlook it too much. If the kids, you guys, you're the catalyst for this. If the kids know that you care as an educator, then they'll care, and they'll drop that barrier, because we don't know what the kids they come from all different situations every day. They come from all different situations. And so that's something powerful.
Yeah, definitely, Don. Just being intentional and connecting with kids. And then we have to come up with specific ways. And this is why I'm saying, so building principals, remember this. I think sometimes we feel that we are the ones that have to come up with the different ways or ideas. I think teachers put themselves in a lot of pressure also, thinking, okay, well, I've got these 3 or 4 ways I do it, but I can't think of other ways to do it. So here's one thing I would encourage all principals is just come together as a faculty, right? And part of that is just saying, hey, listen, what is your go-to activity? What's your go-to strategies that you use in your classrooms to build community, to make connections, to build relationships? If you've got a staff of 45 or 60 or whatever, if every teacher just came up with one and then come up with an activity, whether that's just around the table, if it's a quick activity, if it's a speed dating activity, but at the end of the day, let's curate all those somewhere for teachers. Let's model some. Let's pull them out every time we come back to a faculty meeting. Let's give teachers learning from other teachers, building that community of learners where we don't have to come up with all the ideas ourselves. Because after a while, it's like I'm racking my brain trying to come up with another community builder. There are people who have a bazillion community builders. If we can all collectively put those together and learn from one another, then we can be really intentional. So those are the strategic ways. We can't just say, hey, build relationships. Right. Because oftentimes people say, I think I'm building relationships, but why are some more effective than others? And so how do we even define what relationships means? What do we mean by that? And so we have to just be really clear when we're talking about relationships or connections, not just what it means, but how we're doing it and how do we work as a staff to support one another.
Okay. I agree. Thanks for jumping in. That was awesome. I can't believe you popped in the middle of a workout.
That's okay. Hey, guys, anytime business is the best in the game, I got to do it. And so appreciate you.
Yeah, because Ashley has no excuse now, Don. She says, I'm in the salon. I'm like, well, if Don's in the workout, you can be in the salon. What's the difference?
And so, no, like I said, I really make my kids proud of wearing this sauna suit around town, rocking it out. So anyway.
Well, guys, good Rocket Nation on the front of that thing. You got it rolling, man.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, guys, thank you for everything you do. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you. Keep it up.
All right, buddy. Thank you so much. All right, peace out. All right, everybody. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Oh my God, that was fantastic.
you coming from, wherever you're at. What is that? I said the crib, right? The crib.
Yeah, it's a bedroom upstairs in northern Wisconsin. We get some paint on the wall. We got the whole thing. Got my full mark, sweatshirt on. The guy's coming in with a sweatsuit on, sauna suit. My gosh.
I feel like I'm looking around. I'm trying to find like I feel like I need to put some gear on. It's getting a little chilly in here.
I know.
I could do maybe I'll get a walking treadmill. That's what I'll do. I'll get a walking treadmill and do the weekly show from the walking treadmill because Don just embarrassed us, Joe. There's no excuse.
I can't deny it, man. At this point, I feel bad that I haven't worked out since, I don't know, 94. But at this point.
Wait a second. Say that again. I want to hear that one more time. What did you just say?
94. Yeah, 94.
What was 94, Joe? Say it again. You haven't what?
I haven't worked out since 94. It's I don't know. I was 1 year out of high school. I think I still.
Oh my God, that's embarrassing. Hey, that is embarrassing.
If I'm not being chased, I'm not running, man. And then I'll trip the person that's behind or right in front of me just so I'm not last. I'm just going to tell you that right now. If you're in front of me,
I haven't worked out since 94.
I wish I was lying, Jimmy. I really do. It's just not a thing, man. I'm telling you. I
still remember the day someone was trying to get you to buy some running shoes or to run like a 4. You've never even ran like a 5K ever in your life, like a turkey trot or nothing?
Jimmy, you may as well have asked me, have you ever been chased by a bear? Because that's the only reason that I would run far away. And why? That's the dumbest idea. Running's dumb. Let's be clear about that. Just running. Please stop it. We're not going to do that. It's a whole other show, Jimmy. It's a whole other show.
Yeah, Ashley's right. You do work out once a week. It's the 1 minute walk to work. I mean, come on.
Exactly right. I can tell. I love it when I can tell people, you know what? I walk to work. I walk to work every single day. Well, that's not true. Some days I drive, but that's the whole other story.
Joe, I didn't believe it until I came to visit your school, but you literally live right across the street.
Nobody needs to know that, Jimmy.
Like when you back your car out of the driveway, you back into the parking lot of your school.
Jimmy, nobody needs to know that. They just need to know that I walk to work, Jimmy. That's all that means. That's all it needs to be said. You walk to work every day. Yes, I do.
Joe,
yes, I do. I value exercise, Jimmy. I value exercise.
I just realized something, Joe. You literally could back out of your driveway and drive backwards to work because you just got to go across the street and you're in the parking lot.
Absolutely. You need to stop. There's a stop sign. No, there's not. No, there's not. Nope, forget it. There's not. I thought there was. There's not. There's no stop sign.
I was gonna say lies on that one.
I bet you were going to say something else.
No, there's only one stop sign in the whole town of Fall Creek. So don't even start. And it is certainly ain't across the street from the school.
That's not true. There's more stop signs. There's no stop lights. It's a different conversation. There's that's a different conversation. But man, how great was it that Don jumped in? I thought that was fantastic. And he made some really, really good points about making sure, what the learner is doing in that space. But it comes down to relationship. The thing that I liked the best about what he said was that everybody talks about building great relationships, just like you said, talking about how everybody thinks they have a PLC. So what did we define it as? How are we making sure that, everybody says, well, we have great relationships or we got great this or we got great, so how do you know? How do you know that they are? Do you see improvement? Do you see connection? For us, when it comes down to the learning piece of what we do, you talked about modeling too. We want to do the same thing. And we've often said that if the only people learning in our school are ages 4 to 18, then we're doing it wrong. So if we're expecting kids to learn and grow every year, are we providing, as administrators, the opportunity for our staff to do the same? Because what does that look like? And what ended up happening in Fall Creek when we changed the model to these passion projects that we do, what ended up happening without administrators saying you have to do this, what ended up happening is there was a tremendous increase in student ownership of learning. Because what happened was when the adults in the building knew what it felt like to own learning, they couldn't help but make sure that the kids did it because it felt good for them. And it wasn't that they didn't want to do it. It was that they didn't know what it looked like. And when they feel what it looks like and they know that it has an impact, there's a much better opportunity moving forward for everybody else because they know what it looks like. I've been so proud of our group because they've taken that whole passion project mentality and of student ownership of learning and new learning and made it part of what they do in the classroom. And that's exceptional. I mean, that's really what we want. Do we model what we want to get out of it? And then are we making sure that we give them the opportunity to do so in their everyday lives in terms of what they do at school?
Yeah, and that modeling piece, Joe, reminded me again, whether we're talking about a building leadership team meeting, whether we're talking about a faculty meeting. And again, I know there's always managerial tasks. There's always business that needs to be discussed. But I also think it's important that we're just really intentional, that there should be some sort of intentional learning component to a faculty meeting, teaching and learning and conversation. And again, that's modeling too. And so we want to create these meetings that are also learning meetings. And so people are walking away like they took something away from it, not just the typical business part of the meeting. Right. So Ashley says she's going to steal the micro visits away from Don. Yeah. Says so. That's good as well.
So, it goes back to that first conversation, Jimmy. If the time that we connect doesn't match what the expectation is and why we're connecting, then the second meeting that happens outside of the real meeting ends up having a bigger impact on the next real meeting when we bring it together. So are we clear about what we want? Are we clear about what it's for? Are we clear about the learning? Are we clear about making sure that it's a connection to talk and discuss? And are we moving forward to get better as opposed to just, reliving something that didn't go wrong or right or whatever the case may be?
That's right. So we're talking about leading and learning in our schools. And you know who also helps and plays a huge role in that? Just not the administrators, but let's not forget about our instructional coaches, right? The role that they play, the value that they bring. Whether they're instructional coaches, people give them different titles. Sometimes they're very content specific, right? Literacy coaches, math coaches, curriculum coaches, but just coaches in general. What's the role they play? And again, it's just a reminder for administrators. Remember, when we have, whether it's one or whether we have two or three, or whether they're building assigned or whether they're district assigned, we have to be really clear as to our staff is, listen, one person or two people or three people cannot be the only instructional coaches in the building or the district.
Right.
Again, I've always been a believer that if we have 45, 60, 100 staff members, then we have 100 coaches. We have 65 coaches. How do we build that community of coaches where everybody's learning from one another? So remember, let's set up our instructional coaches for success. And the way to do that is to be really clear on what their role is, right? Are we being intentional meeting on a regular basis with our instructional coaches? Are we being intentional and clarifying to our staff what their role will be? Are we being clear and asking our instructional coaches the same thing we expect administrators to do? Hey, walk in, build relationships, right? Do some learning talks with the kids, get a feel for what the kids are focusing on. Instructional coaches, be intentional in supporting all teachers. I know sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap of going into certain classrooms that we enjoy going into and thereby ignoring other classrooms. So we have to be intentional in making sure that we're being equitable in the classrooms that we're visiting. Principals, we're going to need your support. We do understand sometimes that there will be some hesitancy from certain staff members who do not want instructional coaches going to their classrooms. Sometimes that's based on a trust issue, right? They feel as though they're going to be spies or go back and share with administration. And administrators, we have to be really clear that that cannot happen. We have to be intentional in sharing with our staff. Listen, yes, we'll be meeting with instructional coaches, but we're going to talk about instruction in general. One of my commitments to you is that we will not be talking specifically about you, right? If you as a teacher give me permission and would like support from an instructional coach, yes, then I will encourage that. But we will be collecting data. We will be looking at different ways and aligning our building goals with the instruction. But our whole ultimate goal is to get all classroom teachers and other teachers' classrooms. And so want to be really supportive. But one of the ways I saw in a building here this week that was just awesome, Joe, and I loved it, is where the instructional coach and the administrator went into a classroom together. The teacher knew that was going to happen, right? Because they've shared this with the staff. But then what was really clear is after doing that a few times, then the instructional coach covered that classroom. Then the principal and that teacher did some learning walks together. And that there's something powerful about that, right? So powerful in allowing, you're building this culture where people don't feel threatened, that people don't feel judged, they're going to be judged, that people are now opening their doors. And so how do we intentionally build that culture where everybody sees themselves as an instructional coach? And I got to tell you how powerful that was in the conversation and just the way the teachers felt about that. But kudos to administrators out there that are covering classes or having other people cover classes. and doing learning walks in groups together, sharing, covering each other to go out there and learn from one another, but to be clear, or bring clarity, I should say, in terms of what we're seeing when we go into classrooms and learning from one another. And as Ashley said, stealing little ideas or borrowing little ideas from other teachers. So it was so cool, Joe.
That sounds like a blast, honestly. I think that a lot, and I think people get a lot out of it. And I think the thing that we need to, the balance becomes, how do we make sure that we continue to move people forward without overwhelming them because something's always new, right? I think there's a lot of people in schools across the country right now, especially, that we're just trying to hold on. And understand, we understand that that's what it needs to be right now. We understand that. But what can we do to kind of continue to help people move forward without overwhelming them? And sometimes, honestly, an instructional walk or a walk with another teacher just to go see what else is going on in a different classroom without the expectation of coming down and then writing a report about what you saw, right? Yeah. That is good, because it says two things. It says there's other great things going on in the building. And it also says we want you to be able to get out and actually see some of these things, and then you can kind of connect with each other on it. And it's not that that you don't want to take everybody to the same room, of course, right? But you can take people to different places across the building, because I think it's a really powerful experience to see what's going on in other classrooms, because we don't get a chance to do that. That's why we started our social media feed. We had a couple teachers that said there are great things that are happening all over the place. We never get a chance to see them. So could we figure out a way to do them? And for a couple years, when we started our social media presence, we did our live tweets. You know, if you had a hashtag Go Crickets on a tweet, it would go live to one of our TVs in the building. So when you're walking through the building, you could see some really great things that were happening across the building without being in that classroom. Teachers want to see what other teachers are doing, as long as they're not going to be judged for not being that person. And that comes down to whether or not you have a good relationship with the person that you're working with.
Also, just reminds me in general, Joe, especially for those administrators that are in larger schools, like whether it's middle school or high school, is that I still thought it was always pretty cool just to do these little, I don't know what you want to call them, little tours where staff, because they'd say, I have never been to the family consumer room. I've never been to the shop room. I've never been to the chorus room, right? So just being intentional and doing these little tours and letting people show their areas, and it's just always really cool, right? Again, it's always about building that community and creating that sense of community where everybody's supporting one another, but we have to help people see what's going on in our schools and our other classrooms. And that's what we're talking about this morning. The idea of building the community and leading the learning, and all these they just overlap, right? They intersect. Right. You know, just what you mentioned, Joe, I can just see in those learning walks, those relationships that are being formed, right? And not just in the content, but also cross-curricular, also vertically. And so there's so many different ways. It's really, at the end of the day, is how are we being intentional building that community? So, Joe, here's one that I always love doing, and I still hear from teachers that this is one of their favorite activities they always did. But I always love taking teachers on site visits overnight, right? Where we would go to a building and take a group of teachers. The conversations, first of all, that happen in those vans on the way to these schools, when you're in a van with, for 2 or 3 or 4 hours with staff. And I still remember one time being in the van and listening to the conversations, and I thought, oh my God, I am so freaking old right now, listening to the conversations of the teachers, realizing, oh my God, I am so old. But the cool part was just breaking bread with not only my own staff, but the staff of another school, learning from one another, making those connections, having my staff spend the entire day in another school with other teachers, learning from them. And every time we'd come back, right, I still remember, it's funny, when we'd get there was always a little awkwardness to meeting these people. And by the time we left, they're hugging each other, there's tears, they're taking selfies, they're exchanging numbers. And this is just after like a day and a half with people. And it just is a reminder again, when we're intentional in building this community and learning from one another, how powerful that can be. And every time we'd come back, there was always 3 takeaways. One, we'd go in and we'd go, man, they were doing some cool stuff. There is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be doing some of that stuff, right? That was one takeaway. Other times we'd walk in like, man, we're doing that. So it kind of validates the work that we're doing. Like, yeah, we're doing that too. And then other times they look at stuff and say, we do something similar, but I kind of like the way you do it, just a little different. I like that idea. I'm going to tweak it and steal it.
Yeah.
But just the information then they would take, whether it was from the classrooms, their meetings, their agendas, tools that they use. So again, as we come back into the next school year, maybe there's a way to connect with neighboring school districts, do some teacher exchanges, be intentional in that, allow teachers to share with one another, and just continue to build that community and continue to lead the learning. It doesn't have to be you leading the learning, but it's creating the opportunities and the experiences for other people to grow in that experience. And so again, that's what it's when we talk about leading the learning, it doesn't have to be you all the time, principals. So anyway, Joe, anything in particular you can talk about in terms of leading the learning activities or anything in your district that you want to share before we, as we wind down? Believe it or not, we're almost nearing the end here.
Well, I think the biggest thing that's happened with our leading the learning piece of it is showing or having our staff actually model what that looks like for everybody. And, instead of at the end of the year, I used to send out, as the principal, I'd send out, you have to reflect on your year and tell me how you grew as a learner, as a teacher throughout the course of the year. And I just kept getting the same response because this is the way that I set it up, right? I set it up. What went well? What didn't go well? What are you thinking about next year? What are you going to do in the future? It set it up, and I just kept reading these things, and they were all the same. And it wasn't their fault. It was my fault because that's the way that I set it up, right? And so we changed it to having this street fair for everybody so they get a chance to actually demonstrate their learning for their colleagues. And what we do is we have a rotation. All of our teachers get together in the gym, and we have tables set up, and you put a display of learning on your table. It doesn't have to be some big grand anything. It can be a quick video. It can be some documentation. I don't care what it is, because the power is in the conversation. And then we have our staff go around and we rotate, and you get a chance to present your learning or have a conversation about your learning with your colleagues. Now, what ended up happening with that was twofold. The first thing was that people understood that we valued their own learning because we put it on display. The second thing that happened is the amount of connection that happened between teachers after those days was absolutely phenomenal. Like, we've had high school teachers saying, I really love what you're doing here, to middle schools. Can we make a connection and talk about maybe doing something, partnering on a goal for next year? We've had a high school ecology class that I don't know if it was ecology, I shouldn't say that. A high school science class that created curriculum for first grade kids, and then went down and taught the first grade kids some science lessons aligned to their standards. So now we've got this connection in a building that's a K-12 building, that now when you go places, other people and what they're doing across the board. So the street fair, of all the things that we've done to continue to help people not only learn throughout time, but display their learning and create connections to their own learning as an adult, has probably had the biggest impact on our building.
I like that. Street fair. Next time, I hope you have the taco trucks there, Joe. I just want to make sure you have food.
We should.
Feed my people.
I agree. We feed them. But that's, I understand. This year, it's the last day of school, too. So we do them on the last day of school. No kids in the building. Everybody's out. Like, you can just sit and have conversations. There's no follow-up. We don't follow up and say, okay, so now you need to write down what goes on. Like, we take pictures, put them in their learning plan, and then that's it. Like, that's it. All I got to do is a 3-minute. I ask them to do no more than a 3-minute audio reflection on what they learned. And then they send me an audio file, and it's done. They talk to me for 3 minutes about what they learned. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I want to give a shout out to Patty from Barstow. Patty, thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you for jumping in this morning. For Don, who jumped in here with a sweatsuit. That's going to be an all-time. That's going to be hard to beat. It's going to be hard to beat.
I see Frank jumped on too. You see Frank jumped on too?
Oh, he did. Oh, there he is. Hey, Frank. Yes.
Just to challenge the staff to follow up with 3 things they didn't know, 2 things they want to learn more about, and 1 thing to implement in practice. I thought that's a great idea too, just to make sure you break it down so it's not always the same thing. So
a little 3-2-1 framework. Yep, little 3-2-1 there, Frank. Well done, well said, my friend. So, hey, Joe, on the last comment you said, one of the things you shared there, just again, it's just always a reminder: building principles. identify in your buildings who you think is feeling a little isolated,
Mhm.
who is not connecting well, and more importantly, what are we doing about that?
Yeah.
We don't want teachers to feel alone. Still believe all teachers want to be great. So what role are we playing in supporting them to be great? So let's be intentional and reaching out. Let's do that walkabout this week in our schools as we come back from the break. Let's find out who's feeling a little isolated. Let's get in those classrooms. Let's be intentional. Let's end the year strong in doing that. And just continue to do your very best. Those little micro visits, right, Don Epps? Those little micro visits. So, hey, listen, we've had a great show. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Don, again for jumping in. For those of us who joined us live today, again, we were talking about leading the learning because we know it's always about leadership in our schools. And when we talk about leadership, remember, we're talking about everybody in the organization. Joe Sanfilippo, I'm going to let you close it and bring it home, my friend.
I don't know. My feet are starting. My feet are freezing. It's still that we talk about. It's 22 degrees in Wisconsin right now. Have we had that conversation, man? I'm telling you, this is great. It's like April showers bring May flowers, except in Wisconsin. April snow showers bring angry, bald, bearded guys. Let's be clear about that. So when it comes down to it, everybody, think about what you're doing in terms of next week when you get back into the classrooms, into the hallways. Think about this. What 2 things are you doing right now that you feel really great about in terms of your instructional leadership? And what's one thing you want to tweak, what you want to try moving forward? Just one thing, right? Don't push the stuff off to the side that you're doing that's really great just for the new toy. Think about what you can do to make sure that you build on the things that are already working so you don't feel overwhelmed. And to be really honest, that models what you want for your teachers too, because you don't want them always getting into a situation where they feel like they have to try something new all the time because they're never going to know if that has an impact.
Absolutely. Well said, my friend. Joe Sanfilippo, you have a great week, my friend, because guess what? You still have a real job and I don't. Okay? Peace out, everybody. Thank you so much. God bless. Have a wonderful week. Happy Easter. And we'll see you next week on the weekly show with Jimmy and Joe.